Welcome to Round's Round.
Hello and welcome to Round's Rant.
I'm joined by Arthur Lappin for today's episode. Arthur was born in Ireland and has been credited as a producer for films such as The Boxer, In America, My Left Foot and Get Rich or Die Trying. Firstly, I'd like to say thanks for coming on the show today, Arthur.
Very welcome.
And secondly, I'd like to ask, how are you getting on today?
I'm getting on great today. Glad that you've taken the trouble to travel out from Dublin to the uncooked centre of Ireland.
Yeah.
And looking forward to the chat.
Good. And to start proceedings, could you describe to the listeners about your upbringing and what were some of your memories of your childhood that stand out?
Well, my memories are very happy from my childhood. I had a lovely upbringing in Kells in County Meath, where my father was a local GP. And I went to the local convent school initially and then to the local Christian Brothers school, and then for secondary went to Clongowes, where my dad had been and where my eldest brother had been before me. So there was a kind of a little bit of tradition there. So very happy days in Clongowes. It was a tough regime. I think kids today would probably find it
a challenge.
Well, yeah, I think so. Like corporal punishment was very much part and parcel, and I probably got much more of that than my fair share.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I got my fair share, but I got more than most. But I have nothing but the best memories, and I suppose that's exemplified best in the fact that I sent my 3 boys to Clongowes too, and they've all finished now, and I'm very, very happy with the experience. So after school, I think there was always an assumption at home that I'd do medicine, I'd follow my dad. I certainly know in retrospect I was very immature at that time, and I went to the College of Surgeons and totally to please my parents, because that's what one did back then.
Yeah.
And I'm talking now in the late 60s. I joined the Bank of Ireland, and joining the bank was I suppose it was generally regarded at the time as a refuge of sinners in a way. And I went into the Bank of Ireland, having spent 2 years in the College of Surgeons, spent 8 years in the Bank of Ireland, and became more and more unhappy at the prospect of spending the rest of my life working in the bank. But at the same time as I was working in the bank, I got very involved in amateur drama. And when I wasn't drinking in the evening, I was usually rehearsing a play or putting a play together, and absolutely loved that. It was almost like I'd never got involved in plays at school. I think I was probably too shy, but I just suddenly found I had a loving for this kind of activity.
Was there any, sorry to cut across you, was there any inspiration for you to get interested in drama? Or
you know, you work in a small country town like Ballyborough, and there's very few things that you can do at night. I wasn't GA, I wasn't very sport oriented, so that end of things wasn't appealing. And really the people who did things in those small towns were blow-ins like myself. They were the bank officials, the teachers, the guards. They were the people that you kind of mixed with at night, and your social circle was in that world. And we decided to put on a play. It was, I remember well, it was Drama at Inish by Lennox Robinson, and it was a complete revelation to me, just in terms of as something that appealed to me like nothing ever had before. So I kept involved with drama, and I was transferred back to Dublin in the bank. Not long after that, I only spent about 2 years in Ballyborough, and when I was back in Dublin, I joined 2 different amateur drama groups and was like constantly rehearsing plays and doing plays in pubs and clubs and anywhere we could get plays on at the time. And it got to a point where I was actually spending more time doing that than I was doing my bank work. And I looked for an opportunity to get out of the bank, which was hard to do. Like in those days, the notion of permanent and pensionable employment was very was a very important thing for parents particularly. And my mother died when I was, God rest her, was when I was about 26, 27. And I honestly think had she lived, I probably would still be, I would have retired from the Bank of Ireland after doing 40 years. It almost was, when she died, it almost in a strange way gave me a license to look at other possibilities. And I tried two things. I applied to the RTE rep. At that time, the RTE employed repertory of actors on a full-time basis. And I also applied for a job that was advertised in the Arts Council. Their drama and dance officer in the Arts Council. It was the first time they'd ever made this appointment because...
And what was the Irish film industry like back then? Because now, obviously, you're seeing year after year big movies come out.
Absolutely.
Successful.
And there was nothing with the exception. There were a few... They were sort of British-based or American-based companies that came in and used Ardmore Studios, but there were no Irish producers at the time. Now, there was an honourable exception in that Redmond Morris's father, the Lord Killannon, did have a production company earlier, maybe 10 or 15 years earlier than this, and had done things like The Playboy of the Western World with Siobhan McKenna, which were... like in retrospect, were important works, but wouldn't have garnered mass audiences internationally or anything like that. They wouldn't have had general release outside of Ireland, and not even sure within Ireland that how wide the release would have been. But at that time, when I worked in the Arts Council, for example, and there was no Irish Film Board at this stage, there was a thing called the Film Script Awards, which the Arts Council gave every year, which was worth 30,000. And like every director in the country sought that award because it was literally there was one of them every year, and everybody sort of went in for it. But really, the guy I went to that I joined up with, David Collins, I would regard he made a film with Cathal Black in, I'm inclined to say, in the late 70s, called Pigs. And I think it was a really important film because it wasn't a big budget or anything, and it didn't do spectacularly well or anything like that. But it was important in that I think it was the first time ever that an Irish producer was literally just that on a film. It was the first time a producer was employed just to produce. And it was out of that David joined with John Kelleher and did set up Strongbow, and at the same time, I set up Screen Traders with David as well. But I subsequently merged into Strongbow and worked with them for about 2 years and got a lot of experience. Did quite a well-budgeted drama series for Channel 4 called When Reason Sleeps, and we did a couple of low-budget feature films. Did some documentary work with.
And were you producing on that?
I was like a hired producer within. I was employed by Strongbow, but I actually was producing whatever needed to be produced, whether that was documentary or television drama or feature. That's what I did. And I did that for about 2 years. Out of the blue, I had a girlfriend at the time who was an actress, and she acted mainly with Jim Sheridan in Project. So I would have had a lot of exposure to the work that the Sheridan brothers did in Project in those years. And I was friendly with Jim Sheridan. But he went off to live in America for about 8 years, and he had come back to Dublin to basically do some work on a biography of Barry McGuigan that he was writing Barry McGuigan's official biography at the time, and he came back to Ireland doing some sort of promotional work on that. But at the same time, Noel Pearson had approached him to, along with Shane Connaughton, to write an adaptation of Christy Brown's life. And I would have been one of the very few guys around at the time who had produced some stuff. Yeah. I had done a course that was actually run by an organisation called ANCO. ANCO was the forerunner of FOSS, and it's now called something else. Noel Pearson, who was the producer of the Christy Brown film My Left Foot, asked me would I line produce it, because he had never done film before. Jim Sheridan had never directed film before, but I had actually...
Just on that like there's a lot of different phrases for producers. You know, you've got your producer, executive producer, line. What exactly, just for the listeners who don't fully understand?
It can vary a bit. Line producer is a very specific role. It's basically running the production. It's managing the production. It's you're given the budget. You're probably not involved in raising the budget.
Okay.
But the producer raises the budget and then gives you the script and the principal cast and the director, and you get on and you make the film for the budget within the schedule that's been agreed. And it's important to say most films, particularly independent films, have what's called a completion guarantor. It's a very specialised form of insurance that guarantees the financier that come what may, the film will be delivered. It's really important for a financier. But you can imagine that insurer has huge powers on a film. So if the line producer is not actually coming in on time and on budget, they basically get fired and be replaced.
Okay.
So I was line producer on that. I was a good line producer, I think. Actually, very. I think I often think it's the thing I'm probably best at is trying to understand what the director's vision for the film is on one hand, and on the other hand, the finite nature of the resources, the financial resources available, and the time resources available, and trying to make the best possible use of those two situations. So it's like being sensitive to the director's needs, but also being conscious that you have to do it within a certain amount of time and within a certain amount of money.
So would you reckon that, do you think directors have to maybe compromise their art or some of their ideas due to some of the financial restrictions?
Definitely, all the time, particularly younger directors and directors who are making films for small budgets. I actually don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I often think some of the smaller budget films we made were better films because it demanded more of all of us creatively to how are we going to best solve this problem. Somehow when you get to, as we did do, up to $40 million, it became a much more, I'm hesitant to say indulgent, but something approaching an indulgent approach where there wasn't the same kind of edge to maybe do your best. Maybe it did buy you more flexibility. Maybe it did buy you better people. And better people, say, for example, in terms of directors of photography or designers, inevitably want to spend more money.
Yeah.
That's the nature of the game. So where, we made My Left Foot for £1.7 million at the time. A couple of years later, we made The Boxer for $40 million. It was like, and the $40 million back then was serious amount of money. That was mid '80s, so it was a serious amount of money, and I'm not sure that, I'd look at My Left Foot today and I'd certainly see things that I wished we had more time or I wished we had more money to spend on design or something. But I know there's an edge to it.
If you could give an example, like what particular thing? Because like My Left Foot, it got nominated for Oscars. So
it got 5 nominations.
Yeah, it was hugely successful in that.
Yeah.
Right, but what do you feel, whether it was actually a filming issue or budget, like what particularly stands out?
I would say time, that we a lot of times we literally had to stop shooting. We couldn't do 2 more takes at the end of the day because we couldn't afford to pay the crew the overtime, so you literally stop. But in a strange way, like certainly where the performances were concerned, and that was Jim Sheridan's, like that's his absolute signature, is his ability to work with actors to garner extraordinary performances. Like I think he's probably, I don't know, I can't be certain of this, but I think he might be the only director in the world to have had his first 3 films nominated for Best Actor in the Oscars.
I'd say you'd struggle to find.
Like he had Christy Brown, or he had Daniel as Christy Brown. He had Richard Harris in The Field was nominated for Best Actor, and Daniel was nominated for Best Actor for
In the Name of the Father. Yeah.
So I think I might be wrong about that, but I suspect he may be the only director in the world in his first 3 features had a Best Actor nomination, as well as loads of other acting nominations. Like Brenda Fricker won the Oscar for My Left Foot as well. So Yeah, this guy who had, with Shane Connaughton had done a really interesting adaptation and a very free adaptation of Christy Brown's life. Like there are many incidents in the film which weren't actually from Christy's life, but which are very true to the essence of the man. And I remember Christy's family, and he's a big family, coming to Ardmore Studios to see a screening of the film long before we actually released it. And they were absolutely thrilled with, and I remember hearing them talk about the scene. Do you remember the scene with the coal lorry? I think it was on Sheriff Street we shot it, where they opened the coal lorry and all the coal comes out the back. That wasn't from Christy's life. That was from Jim Sheridan's childhood.
Okay.
So, but it was completely true to the spirit of who Christy Brown was, and I think obviously we were very fortunate to have had for Daniel to have done it, and Daniel absolutely wanted to do it with Jim. Jim was writing the script at the time, but my understanding was that Daniel said he would act in the leading role on condition that Jim directed it. Bearing in mind that Jim had never directed a film before. Now, he had been a very eminent theatre director and had done remarkable work on the stage, but and I would say to this day, I still obviously go to the theatre, and I would say some of the stuff I saw in Project at that time was better than anything I've seen in the last 20 or 30 years, which are, companies that are a lot more resourced than Project was back then. Yeah. So he's a fantastic ability to deliver with very little money. And as I say, there's almost a part of him that, almost in a way, the less money he had, the better he was, because he was more inventive and more creative. Okay, but there would be a give and take thing on the money as well. You asked about directors compromising. Like I'd remember on The Name of the Father, which is significantly more money, but not a bottomless pit of money. And I would remember on that where Jim would want to do something that we hadn't scheduled, and I'd say, sure, we can do that, but you have to give me something back from later in the schedule. You know, you have. The money's finite, so if you want to spend more of the resources there, I've no problem with that. But we have to find find a saving somewhere else. And
was there ever a case where that was maybe promised? So he would say, "Yeah, listen, I'll give you such and such back." But then when it got to the time, he was like, "No, we need it," and then you went over budget. And
always, that's the human nature of making film, and it's it's about the kind of trust. Like Jim would always shoot in post-production. We would never have budgeted to shoot in post-production, and it's quite expensive often to recreate sets, particularly where you've built sets, or if there's any special effects involved in those scenes. And getting the cast back maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks into editing to get the cast back. They're out of contract, and that they hadn't cut their hair, or that they were still looking the same as they were in the film. That's very tough, but we've always managed to do that. Often it meant going back to financiers and saying, look, we have a very special film here, and let's not sink the ship for a ha'porth of tar. And in most cases we were able to go back. It's a hard negotiation, like going back to financiers and saying, I know we said we'd make it for 12 million, but we actually need 15 or we need 14 or whatever. That's hard, and they sometimes will extract quite a cruel price from us as producers for that, and you're expected to put some of your own fees back into the film with very little prospect of ever seeing that money again. But I suppose in the end of the day, what we're constantly doing, and what I loved working with Jim, it was never about making money. Sure, we wanted to be paid, but what we always wanted to do was make the best films we possibly could. And I think in that sense, he and I we were very much on the same wavelength as far as that was concerned. That it got to a point where it didn't matter how much more money it was going to cost to do an extra 3 days filming. We had to do it. Yeah, the film needed it.
So you wouldn't, like we previously said, the art just wouldn't be compromised to an extent. And yet, to kind of take a few steps back there, you were speaking about Jim Sheridan getting the best out of his cast. Well, it's up to debate, but some of Daniel Day-Lewis's best performances have come in. My Left Foot, In the Name of the Father, The Boxer, and you could go on and on all about of his top roles. what was it like? Because you hear many myths behind the camera. Like Daniel Day-Lewis, they claim that when he was shooting My Left Foot, he would refuse to come out of the wheelchair, which led him to breaking 2 of his ribs. Like, is that type of stuff true, that he was such a method actor, that he was so dedicated to the cause?
I heard about him breaking his ribs, and that's a new...
It's
a
an
new,
internet...
A new mythology
myth,
that's grown up. He might have damaged ribs when he was doing The Boxer. I know he hurt his back when he was training for The Boxer, but... No, he did. He stayed in character through the entire shooting day, and during rehearsals before we started filming, he'd come on set in the wheelchair and doing all the movement that you'd associate with Christy Brown or somebody with that disability. And but there was nothing precious about it. Absolutely nothing precious about it. It was very challenging. It kind of forced you to, every day, to realise what it was you were filming, what the reality was. Yeah. You never, for a moment, and it was the same with Jerry Conlon in The Name of the Father, you never once, because of the intensity of his immersion in the role, you never once doubted his connection to the character that he was playing, and through him we all experienced that connection. It was an extraordinary thing, and some people talk about method acting, which was something that came out of the Lee Strasberg School in America, and was very kind of prop oriented and business oriented, where actors would be doing business, and some of it gave me a pain in my face over the years. Like I remember, I'm not going to mention particular names, but famous actors who you just said, put down the ashtray, stop playing with the thing. It was so obvious that they were using those kind of props to motivate, but that's not what Daniel was doing. Daniel was, his research was impeccable. He demanded a phenomenal amount from himself, physically and emotionally and intellectually, but he demanded the exact same from the crew. Not in the way that some actors demand stuff from the crew and they're actually spoiled brats and shouldn't, you want to slap them sometimes. And I shouldn't say that too often. That doesn't happen too often. In my experience, the great actors never behave like that. It's often the actors who aspire to being great.
Yeah, who think they're bigger than they actually are.
Exactly, that can be the case. But I could not I think one of the greatest assets we had on any of the films we made with Daniel was Daniel. I think he set a bar, he set a standard for all of us, and that he wasn't just with us. He, his body of work through his acting career, which I gather is no more now, that he's not going to do any more acting. I'm not inclined to say it's a shame. I think he's left a phenomenal legacy of extraordinary work.
Yeah, well, he's worked with the best, so I doubt he's got any huge regrets. He's got the accolades on his CV and all the rewards for it.
Yeah, he wouldn't have regarded. I suppose the one aspect of he didn't like the business of film. He didn't like the idea of him being sold, his performance being sold, and particularly when it comes to the Hollywood machine.
He was very against that.
Well, I often say, if you're getting paid a relatively modest fee, you'll support the film because it's good work and you want to support the film and get it out there. But if you're being paid very big money, as some actors are, you hear actors being paid $20 million plus, and that's only the tip of the iceberg because they often have a first dollar gross position as well on the exploitation. I think as from a financial point of view, I'd say if you're getting that kind of money, you better break your balls supporting the film when it gets out into the marketplace, because some people have invested a phenomenal amount of money in this project in order for you to be paid that, and the only way to recoup it is to make sure the marketing is a successful aspect of the release of the film, and they can make a huge difference to that. So, but he was. I say it only because not that he was grudging in any bad sense, but that he just wasn't. It wasn't him. He wasn't comfortable doing it. He's a very personal, very private kind of guy. You know?
Yeah, you rarely see interviews or any kind of public appearances from him, apart from when it's obviously connected to some of the films he's acting in.
Yeah.
As you were saying that you were producing, you were helping out with these multiple projects. Some producers end up being in charge of finance, while others have to go out and find script writers, directors, cast. My question to you is, what would your role as producer consist of based on the films that you've worked on? So you don't have to name every single one. But
no, but I suppose it varied from film to film, but by and large I've very rarely been involved in films where I took a credit, where I wasn't actually very involved in the physical making of the film. In some instances, when I worked with Jim, which was a fair, not all by any means, all the work we did. I think I've done about 15 or 16 features and probably 5 or 6 with Jim. They were mainly studio financed films, which is not something Irish producers are used to, because it's a single source of finance. You go to a studio and Universal says, yeah, we'll do the film. And from that moment on, you never have to think about the money, because the money comes in 3 currencies when you need it. And it's just magic.
Yeah.
Now, that wasn't the case with My Left Foot or The Field. That they were very unusual in that My Left Foot was Granada Television in the UK, or Granada Films, which was a subset of Granada, the big Granada company, had put a significant amount of that budget in. I think perhaps, I'm trying to scratch my head here, but I'm trying to say about 60% of it. And would you believe that Rehab had a significant investment, cash investment, in My Left Foot?
Wow.
If you think back now to those days and compare it with today, if you heard the Irish Times tomorrow had heard that Rehab had invested 100 grand in a film, there'd be very serious questions about, is that what the public are giving their money for and all that? But it actually was genius. They took the view at the time that that if this film was successful, and it was a huge international success, if it was successful, what that would do for Rehab's objective in terms of normalising people's attitudes towards disability and opening people's minds to the fact, at that time, the illness Christy Brown had, people call them spastics. Yeah. That was the word that was used, and it was utterly pejorative and implied that there was some sort of mental issue involved, mental deficiency involved. Christy Brown, nothing could be further from the truth. He had a physical disability that made it very hard for him to communicate, but he actually was a really bright, creative man beneath that. And so Rehab, and the nice thing was Rehab got all their money back plus a bit. But if they'd never seen a penny of their money back, they would have regarded their investment as having been really worthwhile because of what it did for the image of disability in Ireland and elsewhere at the time. So that was kind of pretty odd source of and it was a significant investment in the film at the time. When we made the Field shortly afterwards, that was 100% financed by Granada. Again, really unusual for a British TV company to fully finance. I think it was, I'm inclined to say, around £4 million, I think at the time was the budget. That was a big heap of change for one company to take the full risk on that, and I'd say they did okay out of it. But all of the films after My Left Foot and The Field, we had done a deal at Universal. So we had what was called a housekeeping deal at Universal, and we made several films, both Jim directing, but sometimes with other directors at Universal for a period of years. And it wasn't really until almost after my time with Jim, or towards the end of my time with Jim, that I started as a producer having to sort of go out and try and find money in international financial markets, which is what a lot of other companies do. And sometimes it's a pain in the arse, where 7 or 8 or 10 different sources of money to try and put your budget together. It's very complex. The one good thing about that, though, is if you have 7 or 8 or 9 sources of money, no one source tends to dominate creatively. Whereas if you're getting all your money from one source, there tends to be more power behind the money, and that they can be much more assertive in terms of what they want. Like, we'd have always been very careful with Jim that he had final cut on the films, that it was contractually given that the film that would be released was the film that he wanted to release, that they couldn't actually take it over, as has happened with other directors, and that the distributor effectively edits the film at the end of the day.
It's interesting. I was thinking there, like, what would be the biggest challenge for a producer when making a film? Because you have to think, you need to get the cast and crew together before even shooting begins. Then you need to find a budget, as you were saying, whether that's going to be one company or it's going to be 7 or 8 different institutions involved. I suppose, to put that into a question, what is the hardest part of putting a film together, in your view as a producer?
I think getting the script right, because, like, to me the script is the Bible. If you don't have a good script, you probably shouldn't be making the film.
Yeah.
Although there's a lot of films that are made with bad scripts. And it's actually something Bono actually said years ago. I remember being in company with him in LA, because he'd written some songs for a number of the films we'd made. And I remember sitting at the Chateau Marmont one day, and Jim and I were moaning about the fact that some film had come out. It was a pretty shit film, but it was made for a lot of money. And we were sort of saying, you know, so many great scripts don't get made and so many bad films do get made. And Bono said, you have it all wrong. He said, it's not about good scripts or bad scripts, it's about momentum. And I've never forgotten that. I thought it was a great insight that actually getting a film made, and I think it's probably true of other things in the commercial world, entrepreneurs would probably respond to this, that if you have momentum, that can actually drive the whatever the project is into existence.
And what would you phrase as momentum? Would that be a big actor who's come off a big film?
Where you get a confluence of events that you've spent 5 years developing a script and you're ready to put it out in the world. You find an actor, you find a director, and you're launching it. So when you're launching it like that, you're basically trying to attract the money guys.
Yeah.
And once you have 1 or 2 money guys interested, they all want a piece of it. They all want to be involved. So that's what I mean by momentum. So that you're driving for, and you say, we have to shoot on the 1st of March because Daniel's only available on the 1st of March and we lose the window. So it's like a train that starts to gather momentum leaving a station, and people don't want to be left behind. They want to jump on the train.
They're jumping on the carriages, yeah.
Yeah, it's very much that sort of feeling. But to go back to your original question, I think the hardest part is getting, for me, I can't, as a producer now, not working with Jim anymore, and that's all amicable. There's no bad. I can talk about that if you want to, but I'm developing stuff on my own now, and that is the hardest part for me, is getting the script to a point where I'm satisfied, where I can feel I can actually send this out to A-list cast and actually be able to defend this script because I think it's a great script. I hate nothing more than seeing a script going out when it's not actually ready, when it needs another 2 drafts, or it actually needs to be put back in a drawer for 5 years. And there's a huge amount of that around, you know. And I would, just in terms of the Irish industry, I would say, and I've said it quite audibly over the years, that in my view, where the Irish film industry has been really successful in the last 20 years, I would still be very strongly of the view that far too many films have received production funding from the film board before the scripts were ready to be made. And I would stand up and defend that view. I think there are far too many films that could have been better. I think there are many films that shouldn't have been made, possibly, but I think there are far too many which could have been so much better if a small amount of additional money was invested and time invested in the development of the script. Because I think if you have the script right, there's a kind of it doesn't always work this way, but there is a kind of a circle that sort of says the script attracts the director attracts the cast, and the cast attracts the money. That's generally the kind of circle that you're involved in. Because the first thing a director will want to see is the script. The first thing an actor will want to know is who's directing it. And the first thing a financier will ask you is who's in it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always work that way. It can work. You can sometimes develop something with an actor specifically in mind, so the director will come on at a later stage, but it tends to work that way.
Okay. So you've kind of given us an overview of kind of your body of work, and it's spanned over nearly now 25 years. And you still obviously remain involved in the drama and film industry. What I'd like to know is what has been the most noticeable change with film during that period, whether it's on or off the screen. Because I remember reading last week in, I think it was Rolling Stone, they were saying, comparing now to 20, 30, 40 years ago, they were saying, since most of the audiences now have got short attention spans, that the shots you were seeing 60, 70 years ago were lasting 12, 15 seconds. Now I think the average in today's industry is 2 seconds. That's kind of an example there, but just in your opinion, I was wondering, what do you think, whether it's on or off the screen, financially, what's the big difference between
I think there are a couple of huge changes that have taken place. Certainly in the last 10 years, the business model has completely changed. Like time was when companies, studios invested in theatrical feature films for cinema release, with television, video being secondary markets for the film. What has completely revolutionised the business the last few years is that only sort of what we would call tentpole films are being treated in that way now, like the big $100 million, $150 million films. And they're marketing exercises, because almost irrespective of whether the film is good or bad, it's all kind of superhero stuff. They're very expensively made films. Some of them are good, some of them are absolute crap.
Terrible, yeah.
But the marketing spend is so huge on them that they'll get the first 2 weekends out of them, and that's all they want. If they get 2 weekends where they can gross $100, $120, $140 million domestic in the States, that will help to get them out on their investment. And very often the ancillary markets like television, video on demand, those kind of things, there is a proportionality between that links their value in those markets to the value that was actually generated at the cinema. So the kind of films that I've traditionally made, which is kind of like 7 to 12 million pounds, that's the range I'm kind of happiest working in. That's very hard to raise that money now, because it's neither fish nor flesh. If it's a 2 million euro or a 3 million euro film, you'll get organisations like the Irish Film Board and maybe a television station that'll support that, and you'll just be able to make it from that money. But if I'm making a film for, say, $10 million, I can't make it with just Film Board and some TV money. I have to have some industry investment in that, or bank investment, or professional film investment in that mix, and that's very hard money to attract. So the business model has changed radically in the last 10 years and has shifted totally towards television. All the big actors, like when I was starting for making these films, My Left Foot on the Field, these actors we're talking about would not appear in television. They just didn't do TV. There were TV actors and there were movie actors, and they tended not to be the same. Now all the big movie actors are working in television because that's where the big bucks are. And part of that got destroyed because of two things. I suppose the way in which this generation and the emerging generations are actually consuming stuff. They're not watching. They're not going to cinema in the same numbers, and they're not watching television in the same way anymore. So you've had a big influx of investment from the likes of Amazon and Netflix over the last few years, which is effectively a video-on-demand platform. And so as I say, the business model has changed. within the film itself, I think you're absolutely right. Like some of my favourite films of all time, I'd be constantly. My kids are interested, like love watching movies, like most young people, and I'd say, "Oh, you have to see this, or you have to see that," and they're like out the door within 20 minutes. Too slow. So you're absolutely right that the way in which films are edited now is quite different in a lot of instances to the way it used to be years ago. And I would say, looking back on say even my left foot, I'd say if you made my left foot today, you might have edited it in a somewhat different way to accommodate the tastes of the current audiences. But I don't think anything has fundamentally changed in terms of it's my great source of my hope for the future is, telling stories is something that goes back to before we had writing. It goes back to the Greeks. It has been with us for thousands of years. It's not going to go away simply because everybody's watching stuff on their iPhones or whatever it is today. The need to tell stories and listen to stories, I think, will absolutely survive. And there's a kind of a pendulum swinging. You're beginning to. I'm very interesting in the last couple of weeks see the consumption of news on social media now by young people has declined substantially because they don't trust it anymore. There's so much fake news out there. So I think there is the pendulum swung very far in one direction. I think it's probably swinging back a bit now.
You were saying there of the passion you have for a good story and a good film. What film that you worked on in that long list were you kind of most proud of to have your name a part of, if you could? I know it's like picking maybe your favourite son, but
I've always, whenever I'm asked that, I would generally say In America, and that's partly, there's a conceit in that because, like all of Jim Sheridan's films, or certainly the ones I worked with him on, where there was a significant element of Jim Sheridan, the man, in those films, and dilemmas that he had, particularly the death of his brother when he was in his late teens, and the family growing up in Seville Place. It's all in those films, like that. That
would tie in,
like Jim's deceased brother Frankie is all over the place in his work. You sometimes have to search for it. Like it's the young guy that committed suicide in the field. The bull's son that died, or the implication is that he committed suicide. Although that was never in John B. Keane's play. That's what's really interesting. You're adapting one of the great loved plays of the 20th century in Ireland, which was The Field by John B. Keane. And Jim came along and he made a lot of changes. Like he almost turned. He changed the period. It wasn't set in the 50s anymore. It was set in the 30s. The character that comes in to buy the field is not an Englishman, which he is in the play. He's an American. He looks uncannily like John F. Kennedy. He at the end. He there's a self-destructive thing at the end where he's actually beating the waves. Richard Harris whacking the waves after the son is killed when he goes over the cliff. Like that's straight out of Yeats's On Ballia Strand, where having killed his son on Ballia Strand, Cuchulainn goes into the waves and fights the waves at the end. So it's the mythology in a way of Jim's script of The Field is very different to the almost reality that John B. used as the source material, because the story of The Field comes from Ballymacalligot in Kerry and an actual murder that took place, an unsolved murder that took place in the 50s in outside Tralee. But Jim took that story, and whether John B. liked it or whether other people liked it, he actually invested it with a kind of a mythology that I don't think was possibly in the original, or certainly not intentionally in the original. And but the film of all of his that I feel is most truly and in a complicated way tells a profound story is in America. Because if you imagine that Jim has lost his son in real life, his brother in real life, in that film, the central character loses his son. So in a weird way, as a filmmaker, Jim is in both the position of the father and the son. It's like, it's really psychologically, it's very complex.
Yeah.
And
well, that's probably what makes it so good.
And I think that's what I come back to. And it's entirely set in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And nobody has ever... I used to, when we do preview screenings of the film in America, which we would do for months on end before we'd release the film, just to fine-tune it and get response. Sometimes you might want to revoice a line somewhere because they're just not picking up on what was being said. And I think it's crazy not to do those kind of things. If you can make the film more understandable to a wider audience, why would you not do that, you know? But I remember at the end of those screenings, we'd have a focus group, and I'd often sort of say at the end, was there, like, telling the story that we had actually shot all but 10 days of it in Dublin, and was there anything in it that kind of looked wrong? And I remember one guy standing up one night and said, right enough, that building that main building where they lived on the outside it really didn't look like New York. I said, that building is in Tompkins Square Park in New York. But having somebody like Declan Quinn, the two things we did that made that work, and we had to do it here because we could access a tax break here, which we couldn't have done if we had shot it all in New York. And also shooting in New York was much more expensive. Like, we were the second film to shoot in New York after 9/11. I remember going down to...
In America was 2002, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
The year after, yeah. Well, released anyway.
Released, no, it was shot. It was shot. Like, I walked down to Ground Zero 2 days after I arrived in New York to prepare for our shoot in America, and the smoke was still coming out of the ground. It was horrendous. But it was... yes, New York is a very expensive city to shoot in, so we couldn't have done it any other way. But the two things that we did, we had Declan Quinn, who actually hails, or his family hail from just up the road here in Burr, but he grew up in Chicago, and he's a fantastic DP. But he had shot a huge amount of stuff in New York, and every time he looked through the lens, he was able to say, in Dublin, I can buy that for New York. And once Declan was able to say, I can buy that for New York, you felt okay about it. And the other thing was, a lot of the small roles, rather than have Irish actors putting on New York accents, we actually spent a significant amount of money bringing in authentic New York voices from the States to be in it. And that, I think that helped. Anything that helps, you know, it's amazing. If one of the opening scenes in that film is the family coming into the Midtown Tunnel, and you get this great vista of Manhattan as they come into New York. Once you have that shot, you're telling the audience are in New York. Unless you do something pretty awful,
severe,
they're not going. You've suspended their disbelief. They're not going to actually. So you just have to not do anything that. So if that's an actor's voice that doesn't sound authentic, or it's a shot that doesn't seem right, it pulls people out, and it spoils the illusion.
Yeah,
it's like a contract that when we pay our money and the lights go down in the cinema, Jim often described it as a suspension of our mortality, which I think is really psychologically interesting, that when you go into a cinema, you suspend your disbelief for an hour and a half, whatever it is. And the greatest crime you can commit during that hour and a half is to take somebody's mind out of that. So long as you keep that suspension of disbelief going for the hour and a half, you've fulfilled your contract with the member of the audience. Yeah. Don't know what they were doing, but they were just constant
movement.
You talked about earlier on, attention span. It was that kind of thing. going to miss this bit.
Yeah,
How
I know.
are they going to know how the film resolves if they're going to miss that bit? And it didn't seem to bother them. It's just the way they...
No, it's the way it is these days.
Yeah.
A last point on In America, obviously, it was very successful. It got about 25 million at the box office, 3 Oscar nominations. With the success that came with it, there's relief, there's success, there's happiness, all that. When you get, say, an Oscar nomination for Best Actor or Best Director or Best Film, whatever, how gratifying is that? The whole crew, the whole cast and crew, and also to add a second question onto that, what's it like to actually attend the Academy Awards?
It's always a great honour to be recognised by your peers, because that's what the Oscars is. It's peer nomination and peer voting that's involved. I think there's a fierce amount of hype attached to it, and I take that slightly with a pinch of salt. Like, it's fun. I suppose it's an international focus on our industry every year that kind of I don't like the self-congratulatory kind of part of it, and a lot of the bullshit that goes on around it. But it's great. I think when it happened to us first, I don't think we had a clue what it meant. I honestly don't. Like, coming out of Ireland, where when we made in My Left Foot, I'd say there were 2, maybe 3 films a year being made in Ireland, and that was it. Any TV drama that was being made internally in RTE. There was a tiny independent production sector in Ireland at that time. Not even sure there were 3 films a year going on at that stage. And so getting 3 Oscars or getting 5 nominations and winning 2 was an extraordinary achievement for a little small film from a country that had no association with the industry. And I remember going to LA there were about 7 or 8 of us from the crew, the editor, the production manager, the designer, the costume designer. We paid ourselves and we went to LA to be part of the party. And obviously Jim and Noel were going because they had been nominated, so they were all being paid for. But we were really happy just to be there.
Yeah.
And something struck me during that, and was reinforced when the field, which came very quickly on the heels of My Left Foot, that actually we were really good at it. I didn't realise objectively by international standards that we were good at this, and I suddenly realised, I said, we're as good as anywhere. We're as good as England, we're as good as America at doing this. Not in a cocky sense, but in terms of a realisation that actually all the hard graft that we put into this, we've actually spent our time and our money really well, because we've actually delivered the goods. And what was the second part of your question?
Just like, what was it like
to
be surrounded by the so-called Hollywood loyalty?
It was obviously to have won Oscars was huge. To be nominated and not to win,
long way to go.
I will never forget the night sitting through the Oscar ceremony. And the Oscars is very different to the Golden Globes. Like, the Golden Globes is a dinner, and it's TV and film. It's a very different kind of structure, and it's much more convivial. Whereas the Oscars is a sit down. It's like going to the Gaiety. It's everybody sitting down in their place. And we had 7 nominations for In the Name of the Father. And the irony is that Schindler's List had 13 nominations the same year. We were both made the films, our respective films, for Universal. In the Name of the Father was Universal, so was Schindler's List. And Schindler was, the lore at the time was that Spielberg had just earned shitloads of money for Universal through Jurassic Park. It was like a phenomenal hit for them. And he wanted to do this film, and it was really dear to him, which I think the studio executive at Universal said, we give him the money because he's made a fortune for us. But it's a kind of a little German Nazi film in Poland. It's a kind of a love project of his, but nobody had any expectations for it. And here Universal find themselves with, I think, 12 or 13 nominations for Schindler's List, and I think we had 6 or 7 for In the Name of the Father. And we won none. And that was a very, very long night. It was not boring. It was kind of depressing, and I felt particularly. I think Daniel should have won that year. He was beaten by Tom Hanks for Philadelphia, and where I think Tom Hanks did an extraordinary thing because he won back-to-back Oscars for Best Actor. The following year, he won for Forrest Gump, which I think he absolutely deserved.
Yeah.
But I was never that scene where Tom walked around with the drip in the hospital and they played the opera music, which was kind of the big moment of the film.
Yeah.
I never, in my heart, felt that. I felt it fell short, not because his performance wasn't good. It may have been the writing, it may have been the way it was shot, but I never thought. I thought Daniel should have won that year, but didn't. And anyway, there you go.
Yeah. Was it similar to, say, in sport when you get to the final and you come up a step short, come up second best and don't get the award, don't get top prize, or is it more of a case of just it's good to have, but it's not going to make or break my mood, it's not going to make or break how I view this film? Or do a few people, whether it's connected with you or other films, took it really to heart and thought?
No, I don't honestly think. I don't think there's anything. I've never heard Jim, and I think I would have if he had felt this. I certainly never felt that In the Name of the Father was less than it might have been. I think we did what we set out to do with that film. I think we made a really, really strong film about a really major miscarriage of justice that was incredibly important in terms of Anglo-Irish relations at the time. I don't know for a fact, but I know Clinton viewed it not more than a week or two before Gerry Adams was granted his visa to go to America. Because remember, Gerry wasn't allowed. No, I'm not making. I suppose it sounds like I'm making a big claim for it, and films don't deserve to ever make those kind of claims because it's entertainment at the end of the day. But it was about a serious issue. Like Jim has, in a lot of his work, has been concerned with the relationship between the two islands, and I suppose would often have characterised England as a bad parent towards Ireland, like a bad father. And I think he would never have been. He would have been Republican, but never IRA. Like he would have been very clear about that. Yeah. Even though we made, say, Terry George's film Some Other Son, which would be closer. Somebody very eminent who had a lot of control in the film industry here at the time. It was certainly reported to me that he had said that Some Other Son was seditious, which I think was outrageous. Particularly in the same year that it came out, that Neil Jordan's film Michael Collins came out and was by the same person commended to schools as viewing. And you know, whatever you think about Michael Collins, like Neil certainly took significant license with some of the historical events in that film, and but Jim was always concerned to, in a very holistic, thorough way, to explore and ask questions about the nature of the relationship between the two islands. But without, as I say, stepping over that line into a kind of a pro-violence. He was never ever pro-violence.
Interesting. Well, that's pretty much it. To finish off, I do a quick fire round of questions.
Sure.
And none of them are too bad or too good. But whatever pops into your head first and foremost, just shout it out. And as I always say, if it's something not pretty, I can always edit it out.
Okay.
So, tea or coffee?
Tea.
What is your favourite hobby?
Birdwatching.
Your favourite band?
I'm not hugely into pop music, so I kind of don't really have a favourite band. The RT Symphony.
Yeah, that counts. Asking questions or answering them?
Oh, I'd be on the fence on that.
Okay.
Both.
50-50. Your favourite county in Ireland?
Galway.
Your favourite director of all time, apart from Mr. Sheridan?
Fellini.
And last but not least, sum yourself up in 3 words.
Never give up.
Nice. Well, that concludes the episode. I want to thank you a lot for coming on, Arthur. I really enjoyed it. Gave some incredible insights to the ins and outs of the film industry, and I wish you all the best with the future as well.
Thanks, Richie.